Good morning, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome back. This is Valley Beth Shalom, live and online. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein, joined this morning by my dear friends and teachers, Rabbi Sherre Hirsch and by Rabbi Marc Gellman. Rabbi Gellman's face is obscured because of some technical difficulties, but much like the Lord himself, his voice is evident to all. So good morning, Marc.
Hey, good morning from behind my unworkable camera.
And good morning, Sherre. It's good to have you both here.
Good morning, Eddie. Nice to see you.
Before we turn to the Torah portion, and that will be our topic this morning, of course, this has been an extraordinary week, just an extraordinary week of American history. On top of the pandemic and all of the instability that it's brought us, the isolation, the quarantine, and the economic distress that it has brought us, on top of that, we've seen an entire week now of demonstrations, of protests, many of them colored with criminal activity, with vandalism and looting. Others trying to just reach out to the community and articulate a plea and articulate a rage. Sherre, how do you understand this, especially from the point of view? It's this morning's Torah study. As I open the Torah, what does the Torah help me understand this moment?
I love that you asked that, Eddie, because I think that our wisdom as rabbis is really to put the Jewish lens on this. And one of my favorite midrashim is told by the rabbis that when everybody stood at Sinai, which was a few parshiot ago, right, way back in Yitro in Exodus, that those that were blind could see, and those that were deaf could hear, and those that had literally obstacles to prevent them from hearing God's word those obstacles were removed. And what I love about that midrash is, yes, you can take it at face value. If you were blind, you can now see. But I actually think it's a much deeper meaning. There are moments in our lives, really peak moments, where we can see things anew and where obstacles are literally removed by some peak experience, and we have a new understanding, or it forces us to take on a new understanding. And I think for the rabbis, the seminal moment was receiving the Torah. But I think all the time in our life, we have moments of revelation that we have to see things anew, where those obstacles that are in front of us have to be removed, and we have to see things in a different way. And I think this week was really one of them.
I think that for me, what I hear so much in the demonstrations, the looting and the violence and the criminality, that's a different issue. And those are people, I think, that took advantage of this circumstance and really exploited it terribly. And that there's absolutely no justification of that. And those people should be prosecuted to the full extent. But the demonstrations, the more legitimate, peaceful demonstrations, there's a great deal of rage. There's rage at was Martin Luther King talked about, a promise unkept. There's rage at a sense of ongoing oppression under the guise or under the veneer of a society reaching for justice. There's rage of a frustration with the police. Someone pointed out that it's not that this brutality is new; it's just cameras are new. And that the fact that we're able to see these things have been happening to African American, especially African American young men, for quite a while. The question that I wonder about, and I do this with great respect, is when does the rage turn? And after rage needs to come a different temperament, a deliberation. What changes can we make? What is it, if it's true, and I'm not an advocate of this, but if it's true, or an analyst of this rather, if it's true that we are a society stained with systemic racism, then how do you change that? It's not as easy as a voting rights bill or a civil rights bill. How do you change people's attitudes that deeply? If we're a society that's colored by this racism, how do you change that? And that's going to take a different temperament. That's not a raise your fists in the air and scream, Black Lives Matter. That's a different temperament. It's a more deliberative, more contemplative, more reflective temperament, and a constructive temperament. Protest, as any expression of anger, is destructive. But creating a new America, that's a construction project, and that's going to take a very different temperament. And I'm waiting to see, I'm hoping to see, that the demonstrations, the anger, the rage will will yield that kind of deliberative temperament. But I'm hoping that it does. I'm hoping that it doesn't just sort of fizzle.
Well, I think you made a very good point in that that's the goal. I think the looting and all those stuff is it distracts us from the real issues, and that's what makes me very sad about this week, right? The idea of how can we change as a society and how can we address these issues in a real way. Instead, the news is all about curfews and protecting yourself, and that's what's, I think, very heartbreaking.
I have a couple of pushbacks on this, but I agree with your sentiments, both of you, in the sense that it's the deeper issues that matter. It's not transient violence here or there. Look, the issue for me is that the looting isn't a distraction. The looting is evidence. The looting is evidence that the veneer of civilization is very thin, and that the police cannot protect us from every wanton criminal and from our baser instincts. The police can't do that. Jefferson understood that, and our founders understood that the kind of democracy they intended to build in America only works in a civil society, meaning a society in which each individual was informed by certain moral and spiritual principles. That basically we were a country of people who were self-legislating and trying to do the right thing. That if we were a country in which there were people who were willing and ready to destroy civilization at a moment's notice, this kind of democracy could not succeed. So from my point of view, the education and the movement from here on has to be the rebuilding of those civilizing institutions. I have many Black friends who have shared with me my own observation and taught me that one of the great catastrophes of the African-American community, the Black community in America, is the destruction of the Black church and of what it did to civilize people in the community. I mean, the synagogue did the same thing for generations of immigrant Jews. And the fact is that if these institutions aren't strong, and if people don't go to church on Sunday in that community and listen to preachers who are not preaching hate, not preaching violence, not preaching that the entire world is against you forever and ever and ever, and there's nothing you can do about it, but are teaching hope and resourcefulness and self-reliance, if that's and hope from God, if there are institutions like that, we have a future. If institutions like the Black church remain weak, as they are now, or co-opted by people who have other agendas, then we really don't have a hope. We have no hope because the police cannot protect us from everyone. That's what made me desperately sad and fearful that there were more. I remember the mayor of Minneapolis at the riots there at the very beginning said, listen, what do you want from me? There's more of them than there are of us. And that's true when society collapses, when violence spreads. So what we have to do is to create a world in which there's more of us than them. And the only way to create more of us than them is to civilize our community. And the only way to do that is to strengthen the institutions that do that.
I appreciate that. But so I hope that we can see a movement toward a deliberative, reflective, and constructive spirit in this movement that might lead us to a better America. Let's turn now to the Torah portion. This morning, we're reading in the Torah Parsha Nasso, which is the second Parsha in the book of Bamidbar. There are 2.5 Torah portions that tell the story of the last days we spent at Mount Sinai, preparing for the resumption of the journey from Mount Sinai now to the Promised Land. The Parsha we read last week, Numbers, Bamidbar, tells of the census. This week we get the marching orders of the priests, who are going to be carrying all the holy instruments and holy accoutrements, and then a series of miscellaneous laws. that complete this Torah portion, including the dedication of the Mishkan, some gifts that are brought by the tribal heads, a set of miscellaneous laws that are given us in this Torah portion and at the beginning of next week's Torah portion that complete the giving of Torah at Sinai and prepare us for the entrance into the Promised Land. And there are various. It's a miscellany. It's not. There doesn't seem to be an internal structure to it. But among them, there are a couple of these laws which are quite remarkable, and they reflect in some ways actually on Marc's point about the question of what does it mean to be a civilized person, and how do you create a civil society. Among these laws is one of the most difficult laws in the Torah. One of the laws that has created tremendous controversy in ancient times and in modern times as well. Here is the law. It's in chapter 5 of the book of Numbers, beginning with the 11th verse. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, if any man's wife has gone astray and broken faith with him, in that a man has had carnal relations with her unbeknownst to her husband, and she keeps secret the fact that she's defiled herself without being forced, and there's no witness against her, but a fit of jealousy comes over him, and he is wrought up about his wife who's defiled herself, or if a fit of jealousy comes over one and he's wrought up about his wife, although she's not defiled herself, the man shall bring his wife to the priest. He shall bring an offering, an ephah of barley flour. No oil is poured on it, no frankincense. It's an offering of jealousy. It's called in Hebrew the sotah. And then there's a process, a procedure that's followed here. The priest brings her forward, has her stand before the Lord. The priest takes sacred water in an earthen vessel, and taking some of the earth that's on the floor of the tabernacle, he puts it in the water, so now we have dirty water, and he makes the woman stand before the Lord. The priest bears her head, places her hands on the meal offering, which is the offering of jealousy, and hands her the waters of bitterness. And these waters have some kind of magical powers. They induce a spell. And the priest says, if no man has lain with you, and if you've not gone astray while married to your husband, be immune from harm that these waters produce. But if you've gone astray, then terrible things will happen to you. It's a magic act. It's a very strange ritual. And for a long, even in the rabbis of the Talmud, had issues with this. First of all, let's acknowledge from the outset that this is grossly misogynist, because it's a matter of a man accusing his wife, and there's no reciprocal way for a woman to accuse her husband of adultery. And there's this strange magical act, including, by the way, that you write God's name in the dust, and then you put it into the water, and you erase God's name, which you're never allowed to do. What do we make of this thing? It's such a strange act. What do we make of a section of Torah that offers us something that we're repelled by? We say, wait a minute, this can't be Torah. It's magical, it's mystical, it's misogynist, it's odd, it's strange. What is going on here? Marc, what's going on here?
All right. Well, I was taught by my beloved teacher, Rabbi Ed Feinstein, that this is really a way of softening the very brutal and sometimes murderous rage of a husband over a wife, which could lead to spousal abuse, to beatings, and to even killing his wife. And in replacement of that, you have this magic act where it's a hocus pocus, and she drinks some muddy water, and obviously it doesn't make her sick, because that won't make you sick. It may make you nauseous, but it's not going to have your thighs drop and your belly drop, and that's not happening. So then she does that, and that clears her name, and the guy and her husband can't hurt her anymore. And that's part of a defense. That brilliant defense from my brilliant teacher of the sotah is, it's not an excusing of the sotah, but what I'd say is it doesn't come to the heart of its spiritual challenge. I won't say it's evil, but it's spiritual challenge. And that is, the first thing for our viewers to understand is that if you can't read the parts of the Torah that are bad and recognize that they're bad, then you're not reading the Torah. If the only thing you can see in the Torah is this is good, that's good, this is good, that's good, then you're not ever going to be able to gain the full spiritual richness of the Torah, which wants you to read it with your whole moral sensibility. The second problem, the second insight from the Sota, from my point of view, is that it shows the vibrancy of Judaism, that the rabbis knew early on that this was an ordeal by torture. It was a torture, and it wasn't just the drinking of the water. Her hair was let down like a prostitute. Her blouse was ripped open. A rope was tied around her naked breasts. This was really profound humiliation of an innocent woman. And the rabbis hated it as much as I hate it. And what they did is they simply eliminated it. By the time of the destruction of the temple, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was the one who created the Rabbinical Academy at Yavne, it was Yochanan ben Zakkai who said, this is over. The Sota is over. There is no such thing as the Sota trial any longer. Why? Because there are too many men who are also adulterers. So when the time of male adulterers increased, we eliminated the Sota. And so this shows that Judaism, unlike the sort of caricature of it by some Orthodox Jews, that it never changes and anyone who changes is perverting Judaism, quite the opposite. Judaism has always been a vibrant, changing, growing enterprise seeking spiritual uplift and enlightenment. And that included eliminating the Sota. And in our time, it includes allowing women to be rabbis and allowing women to be counted in minyan and in Batei Din. And all of those things that were prohibited in the past by Jewish misogyny have been changed, thankfully. Now, it doesn't mean all changes are good. It doesn't mean that everything you think is bad is bad. That's where you need creative thinkers. And luckily, I've had Rabbi Feinstein to lead me through my own rage at the bad parts of the Torah.
Thank you, Marc. I appreciate the, I guess it's a compliment, I suppose.
No, it absolutely is.
No, I see. So my reading of this is similar, by the way, to what you mentioned a moment ago. I think the Torah is acutely aware of the deeply primitive parts of being human. And in this case, we're about to leave Mount Sinai and begin the journey to the Promised Land. And what the Torah is pointing to is that you're going to have to build a society, a just society, a sacred society. But the human material out of which you build that sacred society includes the insane jealousies of passion, the insane greed of some, the insane destructiveness of others. And that's what the Torah is pointing to in this particular section. It's interesting to me that the presenting problem is not that a woman has gone astray. The presenting problem is that her husband thinks she's gone astray. He thinks so. Now, in many societies, including our own, too often, which to our great regret and pain, husbands take their wives off and just beat the life out of them. And that's exactly what the Torah is trying to stop, trying to interject in the middle of that process, right in the middle of his rage. What does he do? The woman is taken out of his custody and put into the protective custody of the community. The other piece of Torah, by the way, that parallels this one is the other great impossible law, which is Ben Sorer Umora, the intransigent son, the intransigent child, the rebellious son, which is in Deuteronomy. And there what you have is you have a kid who mouths off to his parents. And the Torah says, you take the kid and you bring him to the elders of the community. It's the same fundamental move. Instead of allowing the family to express their rage on this kid, having an honor killing, as it were, you take the kid out. You take the kid out of the family and put him in the custody of the community. And in both cases, you now can protect that person. Then the question is, how do you expiate the rage? What do you do with a man's insane, crazy jealousy? And all of us have done enough marriage counseling to know that this actually happens. And there are people that just go insane with this kind of stuff, and the paranoia and the fantasies they live with, and the violence at the heart of passion. And here, you're right. This is an ugly right. I'm not going to justify the right. But in the end, what it does is it's a magical right. intended, I think, to expiate this guy's rage. Because if there's any chance of bringing these two people together, it's only when he gets rid of his rage that he can settle down and look at his wife as a person again. Chances are they won't be together again. Chances are she'll need to be someplace else and continue in some sort of protective custody. But I think that's what the Torah is trying to reach toward here. Now, again, I don't justify the misogyny. It's exactly right. Nor the magical nature of this, except the magical nature of this in the end is she drinks dirty water, her hair is down. It's humiliating. I take it. I get it. But so is having an insane husband. I mean, that's also humiliating. Sherre, what do you make of this?
So I'm going to respond to both of you because I think I fall somewhere in the middle. Without a doubt, there's busha, there's embarrassment, humiliation, misogyny. But there's a step that we didn't attack directly, which is that taken him at his word, and she had no place, no voice. Now, it's not that she has a voice to say, like, he's a crazy person, but they're going through this magical rite to give him a little bit of self, we're going to let him save face, but we know it's not going to work. We know he's a crazy person. So there's a little bit of trying to work with her and with him. And of course, through the lens of a 21st century Jew, it doesn't look like that. But in that time, that probably was a nod to her. It was to say, we know you are living with a crazy person. And if a guy comes forth that jealous, we can't imagine what he's been like as a husband. And for her to be publicly humiliated is one thing, but also it's a statement by her. This guy is a madman, and I don't like being married to him. He's a crazy person. So yes, it is misogynistic. Yes, it is humiliated. And through our lens of a 21st century Jew, that is how we see it. But if we can stand back in time in that moment, maybe it's not so clear cut. Maybe it was a nod to her to give her a sense of affirmation. We recognize you're married to a crazy person. We're going to bring it out into the open, and we're going to free you from him. Right? Now, it's a rereading. It is a lenient, optimistic rereading. But in my estimation, things are not as binary to say, especially when we're only putting on the lens of our 21st century values. When we step into the Torah and look at the social conditions, I think there's another lens.
Well, what you have here is a Me Too situation. I mean, because basically you're acknowledging the difficulties of sexual politics within a community where men and women share space, and or anyone. I mean, it doesn't have to be men and women. You have a sexual politics where there's jealousies, where there's abuse, where there's control, and it's impossible to carefully adjudicate any of these cases. The Torah offers you a fantasy. I'll give you a magic milkshake. You'll drink it, and we'll know the truth. We'll know whether he touched her. We'll know whether she cheated on him. We'll know whether they violated each other. That's the fantasy. But even today, we can't quite figure this thing out. Let's return for a moment, though, to Marc's point, which I think was very well taken. That the moral power of Yochanan ben Zakkai's pronouncement. Yochanan ben Zakkai, the great teacher of the first century, the rabbi who saved us after the destruction of the temple, to say, I'm going to set aside this law because it just doesn't seem right. The idea that the Torah allows a rabbi that discretion, allows the rabbi to legislate. The rabbis did the same thing with the other law, by the way. The Ben Sora or Mora, they didn't set it aside apodictically the way that Yochanan ben Zakkai did. They simply interpreted it to death. They looked at every jot and tittle in that law and say, well, it has to be this, it has to be that, it turns out it has to be there's only one day of the kid's life that he could do it, and he has to have certain qualities of voice and stature. You basically interpret something out of existence. What you think about this is a remarkable idea. You have given a Torah that you believe is the word of God, but you're reading it as a reader and you say, no, that can't be right. Therefore, my own moral sense overcomes my understanding of the revelation of Scripture, or rather, my moral sense is part of the discovery of the meaning of Scripture, and therefore I have a right to set aside a law of Torah. That is a remarkable moral development.
Look, I just want to say one thing about that. This is part of a large collection of Torah interpretations that are, I would include into the category of, all right, it may be bad, but it was better than any of the other stuff at the time, and it had a certain advantage over the other primitive laws, which were even worse than our law. I ask you to just stop for a minute and try to imagine that if you were black and someone said, you know, the treatment of George Floyd was terrible. He was murdered by the police. But this is so much better than it was during times of slavery, when blacks were just murdered for nothing. And every day there was a lynching. And this is just so much better. You would say, I would say, if I was black, and I say it as I'm a white man, that's not enough. That is not enough. It's not enough that it be better than other places. This has to be changed. This has to be changed and brought, because it's a different kind of critique. If you're looking at the Torah as a historical document, Sherre, you're totally right. This was better than other things, and there's other lenses to look at it. But I don't look at the Torah that way. I don't view it historically. I view it ethically. And that means that what it says has to be right or wrong. And if it's wrong, it should be changed. Changed not because others also did the same thing, but changed because we are better than that. And that's what the protesters on the street are saying, and that's what I'm saying about the Sota. There is a level of spiritual enlightenment that the Torah does not always reach.
I cannot, Marc, in good faith, look at the Torah without looking at its historicity, without looking at it in a context of historical. Now, that might explain why I went to the Jewish Theological Seminary, but to me, looking at it without the context of historicity and what that means is not looking at it authentically. But let me be very clear. I am not arguing. The example you used with George Floyd, I'm not saying, oh, that's enough. I'm not arguing that. I'm just saying,
Sherre, I think we have lost our connection with you. I don't know. Sherre? Sherre? Unmute yourself. Finish your last statement because it got cut off.
oh, I apologize. I'm actually, as you can see, I'm in the basement of our house trying to get the best bandwidth because I've got so many kids taking APs and final exams that our computers just said it's enough.
Yeah, the statement you said, your final statement we missed. So say it over.
I was just saying, in no way was I saying that was enough, and I was complacent in that. In no way was I saying that. I was just saying it's important to shine a light on the moment in time. I'm not saying that's enough, right? Just like someone 100 years from now will say about us, that was hardly enough. But to have a recognition of the moment of time, I think, is for me important. And I think historicity makes a very important, it's an important element in this conversation.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting we bring this back, Marc. Please, God, no. And I'm not suggesting that it's moral in its totality. But I do think that you can see something, you can see an attempt in this law to take a step away from the common practice. The common vernacular was that men own their wives. Look, in Hebrew, the word for husband is Baal, which means owner. That men owned their wives. And if a man was jealous of his wife, he would take her out and beat the life out of her. And boy, it still happens in the world. And the Torah is trying to take one step away from that primitive, or put it this way, it shines a light on it and says, look, as Sherre said, look at what you're doing, and helps us understand, at least we can look at it. This isn't the way. Lo zeh haderech, it's true. But now the question is, how does a society deal with the sexual politics of a jealous marriage? How does a society deal with the sexual tensions between men and women who are in close proximity, or between any people who are in close proximity? It's not a heterosexual problem. How do we deal with these issues, and how do we find a way to preserve people's dignity in these sorts of encounters? Sherre, go ahead.
I was just thinking about this moment in time during this pandemic. There is no vehicle where we see how men are treating their wives. And everybody knows that the amount of domestic violence has skyrocketed during this time because everyone has cabin fever and personality traits are amplified. And so if there was a vehicle, at least a woman would have an opportunity. Granted, I don't want that vehicle. By no stretch do I imply that I want Sota, but at least there's a vehicle for her reality to be confirmed that she's living with a mad person. Can you imagine what he was like? And by the way, I think a lot of women are suffering now. And we have no vehicle, no window into that.
Let's before we conclude, I think we need to conclude with something joyful, because it's been such a very trying week. This Torah portion, amid this miscellany of issues that Moses raises for the people of Israel before they're about to leave Sinai, includes the priestly blessing. 15 words, 3 words, 5 words, 7 words. Yivarecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, Adonai panav elecha v'yikunecha, Yisa Adonai panav elecha, sem lecha shalom. When I was a little kid, Mr. Katz, who was our resident Kohen, would come to the front of the synagogue on Yom Kippur. And Mr. Katz was 199 years old. He had come from the old country and spoke languages that aren't even spoken anymore. And he would extend his arms in the priestly salute. And my father would gather me under his tallis and say, "Don't look, you're going to go blind." And I said, "How do you know?" He said, "Shut up and get under there." And he would bless us, the duchening. And I blessed my children on Friday night, started doing this when they were very small. And I find that these words are very powerful. The symbolism of being able to offer a blessing. God blesses us. Blessing comes from on high. It's a transcendent act of filling the world with power. But in this case, the Kohanim, and by extension, the Kohanim in synagogue, or the rabbi in synagogue, and by extension, a parent who gathers a child in his arms on Friday night and says, you are a blessing to me, you matter to me, is an extraordinarily powerful act. And these words are extraordinarily old. I understand that these are the oldest words that we have an actual written record of. They found something on the Temple Mount, or among the buried things underneath the Temple Mount, a silver scroll with these words stenciled on them. The oldest Hebrew words written in the world were these very, very words, the power to bless. Sherre, in your life, tell me about the power to bless.
So I want to share with you that every single Friday night, we place our hands on each individual child and we give them the priestly blessing. And then we whisper to them something that made us proud to be their parents. Not something that they accomplished or did, but something about their character, their ethics, how they interacted in the world. And what's fascinating, Eddie and Marc, is that my children can be in the worst mood. They can come to Shabbat dinner like, "I've had the worst week, da-da-da-da." And no matter if, because I have teenagers, right? So teenagers are grumpy and difficult. And yet the moment that comes, they put their head down, they wait for Jeff and I to place our hands on us, and they wait for that blessing. And I knew from the first Shabbat that I had Emmett, my firstborn child, that we would do this every week, no matter what. Because it was something, and when you spoke about the 199-year-old Mr. Katz, we had a similar Mr. Katz in my shul. And I always wanted my parents to do that. And my parents said, like, well, it seems kind of silly, doesn't really matter. And I understood their reasoning, and I love them to death, and may their memories be for a blessing. But it was something I knew that I would not forgo in my own parenting. And I think, God willing, till the day I die, every Friday night, we will do this ritual, and it comes right from this Parsha, which is so special to me as well.
Marc, tell me about the power to bless. When have you felt the power to bless?
Well, it's funny, all three of us had the same family practice, even though we didn't call and check it out with each other. Every Friday night, we used to bless the kids. I would do the Yosimcha Elohim K'Ephraim Elohim Menashe, Yosimech Elohim Kesar Rivka Rachel Valeah over the kids, and then the Yivarechecha over everyone. And we would bless them every Friday night. And it's funny because we didn't do much when I was a kid in my home in Milwaukee, but every Friday night we gathered and Dad would do the Yivarechecha. And that connection was the only connection to Judaism that lasted through my rebellious stage, which I'm still actually living through. And that was very powerful for me because it reaffirmed the family. For me, and it was symbolic because this Parsha was my firstborn child, our daughter Mara's bat mitzvah portion. And so I went to bless her after her Torah reading, and she took my hands off her head, and she put her hands on my head. And she said the Yivarechecha from her Torah portion over me. And it was the only moment that anyone in my synagogue had ever seen me silent.
That's a beautiful image, Marc. Thank you. And the only other time I can think of that matches it, not matches it, because there's nothing like blessing your own children. I do this at a wedding. And I point out to kids, people getting married, that we actually do it twice. We do it at the Bedekin. And I ask parents to come and to bless their children at the Bedekin. And I point out that this is the last moment your children fully belong to you, because from this moment forward, they're their own family. This is their invitation to become independent and enter the world. And then at the end of the chuppah, I say the exact same words. And I have the parents come and wrap their arms about each other and around the kids, around their kids, around brides and grooms. Because I say to them, now this is the first blessing you receive as a brand new family, as a couple. And there's something truly, truly powerful about saying to a couple that is about to begin a life together, these are our hopes and our dreams, that you're protected, that you're well, that God lives within you and between you, and that you know peace. And it is a profoundly powerful way. And you just stand there for a moment with everyone's arms around each other reciting these words. You just stand and hold that moment for a second before the wedding comes to an end. It is the most exquisite moment in the world. It is the most powerful moment, filled with potential and possibility and love and tenderness. And it's everything that Moshe wanted us to do. So I thank you for blessing me this morning with your Torah. I want to wish you both a very good Shabbos. Let it be a quiet Shabbos and a peaceful Shabbos for all the world and for all of our communities. And let's bless one another with peace and have a good Shabbos together. Thank you for joining us in Torah study. And I wish everyone who's watching a Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.